Evening, friends. Ash here. I wasn't planning on making another video. It's December the 6th, 2020. I fell into this Rockefeller Foundation scenario from 2010. And the reason I fell into it was I was watching this Rumble video by Net Most Wanted News, Extermination Orders Given. And the gentleman in the video starts off talking about this particular Rockefeller Foundation scenario that came out in 2010 called Lockstep, which is part of a larger document, which I finally looked up and found. I found a little more background on the article here. G. Edward Griffin's Need to Know Rockefeller Foundation paper, published in 2010, predicted how a pandemic can be used as an excuse to establish global authoritarian power. March 16, 2020. The Rockefeller Foundation, and this is the paper here. The Rockefeller Foundation published a report in May 2010 in cooperation with the global business network of futurologist Peter Schwartz. It was called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development. The first scenario, titled Lockstep, describes a world of total government control and authoritarian leadership. It envisions a future where a pandemic would allow national leaders to flex their authority and impose airtight rules and restrictions that would remain after the pandemic faded. The first half of this scenario already has unfolded. Will it continue as predicted? So let's just dive into it real quick. I found the doc here. I got a couple different links for it. I went also into the archive.org and I found it there, the same document, but it looks like it's a little easier to deal with the PDF, so I'm going to deal with that. As you can see, it is a 54-page document that is entitled Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development, the Rockefeller Foundation, GBN Global Business Network. And this report, I believe, came out in, let's see, it should say here, was produced by the Rockefeller Foundation and Global Business Network, May 2010. So a little over 10 years ago. And you can see from the contents, there's a letter from Judith Rodin, Peter Schwartz, and then they go into why the scenarios, why technology, the focal question. We're going to get down to, I believe, over here, the scenarios, which are these four: Lockstep, Clever Together, Hack Attack, and Smart Scramble. These are four different scenarios that they put forward. We're just going to concentrate on Lockstep because that's the one that seems like it's eerily similar to some of the things happening. So let's go to page 18 and let's see. Sorry, I went too far. So here's Lockstep, page 18, scenario narratives. Lockstep, a world of tighter top-down, and these are just scenarios that they're putting out there in 2010. Things to think about, according to them. A world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. In 2012, the pandemic that the world had been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain, originating from wild geese, was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic-prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months, the majority of them healthy young adults. The pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism and breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. The pandemic blanketed the planet, though disproportionate numbers died in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America, where the virus spread like wildfire, in the absence of official containment protocols. But even in developed countries, containment was a challenge. The United States' initial policy of strongly discouraging citizens from flying proved deadly in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus not just within the U.S. but across borders. However, a few countries did fare better, China in particular. The Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantine for all citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from risk and exposure. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics and transnational terrorism to environmental crisis and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. At first, the notion of a more controlled world gained wide acceptance and approval. Citizens willingly gave up some of their sovereignty and their privacy to more paternalistic states in exchange for greater safety and stability. Citizens were more tolerant and even eager for top-down direction and oversight, and national leaders had more latitude to impose order in the ways they saw fit. In developed countries, this heightened oversight took many forms: biometric IDs for all citizens, for example, and tighter regulation of key industries whose stability was deemed vital to national interests. In many developed countries, enforced cooperation with a suite of new regulations and agreements slowly but steadily restored both order and, importantly, economic growth. So you can see what they're doing here, right? It's starting to look really eerily similar to what's going on now, isn't it? I mean, with the masks, body temperature checks, not in the trains yet, but who knows, right? Across the developing world, however, the story was different and much more variable. Top-down authority took different forms in different countries, hinging largely on the capacity, caliber, and intentions of their leaders. In countries with strong and thoughtful leaders, citizens' overall economic status and quality of life increased. In India, for example, air quality drastically improved after 2016, when the government outlawed high-emitting vehicles. In Ghana, the introduction of ambitious government programs to improve basic infrastructure and ensure the availability of clean water for all her people led to a sharp decline in waterborne diseases. But more authoritarian leadership worked less well, and in some cases tragically, in countries run by irresponsible elites who use their increased power to pursue their own interests at the expense of their citizens. There were other downsides, as the rise of virulent nationalism created new hazards. Spectators at the 2018 World Cup, for example, wore bulletproof vests that sported a patch of their national flag. Strong technology regulations stifled innovation, kept costs high, and curbed adoption. In the developing world, access to approved technologies increased, but beyond that remained limited. The locus of technology innovation was largely in the developed world, leaving many developing countries on the receiving end of technologies that others consider best for them. Some governments found this patronizing and refused to distribute computers and other technologies that they scoffed at as second-hand. Meanwhile, developing countries with more resources and better capacity began to innovate internally to fill these gaps on their own. Meanwhile, in the developed world, the presence of so many top-down rules and norms greatly inhibited entrepreneurial activity. Scientists and innovators were often told by governments what research lines to pursue and were guided mostly toward projects that would make money, e.g. market-driven product development, or were sure bets, quote-unquote, e.g. fundamental research, leaving more risky or innovative research areas largely untapped. Well-off countries and monopolistic companies with big research and development budgets still made significant advances, but the IP behind their breakthroughs remained locked behind strict national or corporate protection. Russia and India imposed stringent domestic standards for supervising and certifying encryption-related products and their suppliers, a category that in reality meant all IT innovations. The US and EU struck back with retaliatory national standards, throwing a wrench in the development and diffusion of technology globally. especially in the developing world. Acting in one's national self-interest often meant seeking practical alliances that fit with those. Oh man, this is long. Interest, whether it was gaining access to needed resources or banding together in order to achieve economic growth. In South America and Africa, regional and sub-regional alliances became more structured. Kenya doubled its trade with Southern and Eastern Africa as new partnerships grew. I just want to fast forward here a little bit. I'm trying to see if what they're saying, if there's anything more about the disease. Or by 2025, people seem to be growing weary of so much top-down control and letting leaders and authorities make choices for them. Wherever national interests clashed with individual interests, there was conflict. Sporadic pushback became increasingly organized and coordinated. That's kind of where we are now, as disaffected youth and people who had seen their status and opportunities slip away, largely in developing countries, incited civil unrest. In 2026, protesters in Nigeria brought down the government, fed up with the entrenched cronyism and corruption. Even those who liked the greater stability and predictability of this world began to grow uncomfortable and constrained by so many tight rules and by the strictness of national boundaries. The feeling lingered that sooner or later something would inevitably upset the neat order that the world's governments had worked so hard to establish. The headlines in Lockstep: 2010, quarantine restricts in-person contact, cellular networks overloaded. 2013, 2015, intercontinental trade hit by strict pathogen controls. Italy addresses immigrant caregiver gap with robots. 2017. 2020-ish, will Africa's embrace of authoritarian capitalism a la China continue? 2018. Vietnam to require a solar panel on every home. 2022. Proliferating trade networks in Eastern and Southern Africa strengthen regional ties. 2023. African leaders fear repeat of Nigeria's 2026 government collapse. Interesting, because not a lot of the stuff that they have besides this quarantine has happened really that I could see, right? Vietnam never required a solar panel in every home. I don't think Africa's necessarily embracing authoritarian capitalism with China, although China has made some inroads in parts of Africa, I've read. Intercontinental trade hit by strict pathogen controls. Well, that's happened a lot sooner. But the big shock, the big thing that people were talking about with this whole thing is that this was from 2010, and it's some of the things that they're talking about in this are eerily similar, like with what's going on right now. So I just wanted to post this thing about this, and I had first heard about it from my man at Net Most Wanted News on Rumble, and so check him out. He's also Net Most Wanted on YouTube, but they started to mess with his videos, so he's uploading mostly to Rumble, to some certain videos, so that he won't be harassed by YouTube. So check him out there, and go check this out for yourself if you want to go read this document. I will include the links to it. It's a lengthy 54 pages. And this is all on page 18, 19, where the scenarios come in here, where you could see the lockstep right here. And there's three other scenarios that they go into, and I didn't want to go too long of a video about those, but you can go look and deep dig those yourself and see if you see anything interesting with the hack scenario, maybe because there was a lot of hacking going on the last few years, especially, right? Like last 5-10 years, there's been a lot of big hacking stories. So anyway, guys, I appreciate you. I wanted to share this, of course, you can find the Snopes saying, well, this is just, a scenario, and this is just something that they dreamt up, and yeah, sure, but it's sort of eerily similar to something that's happening right now. So that always makes people wonder when something sounds so similar to something that's happening now that was talked about 10 years ago, right, in this report. So you can read it for yourself in full and make your own conclusion, your own logical, empirical conclusion. And I appreciate you. And this is Ash, WAT News, signing off.